We are back and continuing our conversation with Greg Poirier, who is the founder of the American Grand Cru Society. His background includes private tours to Bordeaux for import-export, buying and hosting private tours for private clients and trade. And I think that's kind of interesting. We'll segue into that shortly. But let's continue our conversation with the American Grand Cru Society. And I was curious, what is the mission statement as you have it so far at this point in time?
Well, thank you. The American Grand Cru Society is an association of consumers and wine trade experts who are committed to identify and recognize our best-in-class American Grand Cru vineyards. We have a priority, and that is to provide wine consumers at large unbiased recognition for best-in-class American vineyards and the wines produced from them, expressing those unique qualities from the place of origin.
What do you say to people, because there are kind of two different schools of thought on this issue, like from California winemaking perspective that I've gleaned over the years. There are people who say, oh my gosh, I wish we had an appellation of origin system in place for classifying vineyards. And then there are people who say, no way, Jose, we don't want anybody or anything telling us what to do. So from your perspective, you think that we need some kind of a classification that recognizes great vineyards.
Well, you're certainly being very generous to the diversity of thoughts and opinions from very learned and passionate people in the wine trade, but I would agree that those are two big general schools of thought, and I would side with both in the respect that I don't believe we need a governmental regulatory system that's very encumbersome.
Yes.
I do believe it needs to be very, very credible. But with modern technology and you know the way people call out each other on things today, I think we can steer a pretty good course to remain a very credible and useful organization. And the details to roll out, you know, they have not yet occurred, and we've been soliciting input from hundreds of experts in the field and consumers, and we're still not ready to come up with kind of a defining statement. But we do have some core principles, and I think those are worthy to give people a sense of confidence that we're quite serious. And the principles are you know, the basic things. It needs to be a defined geographic area, and we're not talking, you know, hundreds and thousands of acres and miles and square miles. It has to be microsystem, you know, microclimate-related plots of land that are definable, that from which very little interference makes, and the wines and the clones that are planted, the vines and the clones that are planted, produce year after year a very consistent, high-quality fruit without a lot of manipulation, without really any manipulation, but we're not quite going the full organic biodynamic, but that's probably a very safe orientation to how we feel about those principles. And then it's to, you know, how do you protect that? How do you make it available for use? How do you communicate that to the public? Because there's not a lot of incentives for some of these great vineyards to produce single vineyard wines, because the market is it's very hard to delineate. It's very competitive. The supply chain, the distribution systems, there's a lot of complexity and sophistication in the business side of wine, which is in itself pretty simple and straightforward.
Greg, let me ask you your thoughts from a historical perspective. The Bordeaux classification of 1855, as I recall, was originally based on market dynamics and tax value. The wines that were worth more money basically were at the higher levels of the Grand Cru status. So what do you have to say as a Masters of Business Administration from L'École de Management in Bordeaux as to in some way incorporate the market dynamics of supply and demand into classification?
Well, definitely, you know, I've had people voice the opinion that you could just do this based on value. What are people paying for the most?
Right.
But I think that does a disservice to so many fine producers who maybe don't market the same way or don't have the deep pockets of a big conglomerate behind them or what have you. And it's really, to me, how we gauge and how do we move forward is what is it best for the consumer. And while I think the input from the business output or the realities certainly has a place at the table, it should never be the driver or the controlling factor.
Okay.
Because the family artisan producer who just makes enough money to have a good lifestyle that deserves the credit should get it regardless if they're getting $100 or $1,000 a bottle, if they have the vineyards with the goods. And there's plenty of those.
And right now, with, I think every state is producing wine, it certainly is a long-term project to be including states who have not, don't have a history of market value or what all the different areas that are potentially available to be growing grapes for wine production. So at the beginning, the focus would be on what, California, Oregon, Washington, New York sort of thing? Or are you thinking even more?
Well, I think we'd start one step into the more, maybe include Virginia or Texas.
Yes, okay.
But I think it's really hard to come up with the line to stop. But you're right on. First of all, California produces 90% of the output of the whole country, so it's going to be very California oriented. West Coast, Oregon, and Washington. I mean, what people don't tell the consumer is that California wine can have 15% juice from Washington or India, for that matter.
Yes.
And the reality is, we know in the trade that Washington produces on par just as high quality as California, probably, arguably, but somehow doesn't have the same recognition in the market. But the purpose of the Grand Cru Society is to, one, come up with something for an American Grand Cru designation regardless of state of origin.
Okay.
But that's the top tier, and that's going to come second. What's going to come first are designations by state, and we will start off with the states that we've discussed first. So the criteria today will be pretty high because it's going to be California, Oregon, Washington, then New York, maybe Virginia. But the criteria for Virginia to be a Virginia Grand Cru can't be the same standards of what a California Grand Cru is today, I don't think yet. And so in fairness to the consumer, I think we need to have some differentiation, but that gives some more outlet for people to strive for excellence on the states that don't get the recognition. And they're pretty motivated already. They do a lot of deservingly great things, and it shouldn't be ignored. But the American Grand Cru is going to be best of the best regardless of state.
Wow, this is a huge, huge undertaking. This is almost overwhelming. This is a very serious undertaking.
It is, and that's why I try to reemphasize this is very, very initial stages. It's going to need a lot more than what we can bring to the table within the group we have, and it's something that we want to let mature well over time.
Okay.
So in that way, it's going to be best suited for the long term. But if you think about living in China and wanting to buy an American wine, it's going to be a lot more helpful to market our wines and export them once the system's more established.
Okay, let me switch gears here in the time we have remaining and ask you about your travel, the travel consulting or business that you also have.
Sure. Well, I have for years now had a part-time business, a small business. It's called Wine Guy Enterprises, and Wine Guy Tours is a part of it. Wine Guy Tours was set up in 2005 when I started committing personally to making sure wine and getting more and more of my time was more devoted to the things I love the best. So travel and wine and history and culture and food and art, to me, are all in the same basket.
Yeah. And
I tend to go for the travel and the wine side as the primary driver. And, going through our own personal wine education with all the reference books we get, we all have to do travel, and we all tend to do that for those of us that are very involved. I think people miss out in not taking that travel because have you ever been to a serious wine destination that wasn't worthy to go to without the wine? I mean, they're in the most beautiful places in the world.
Yeah.
They have the most fantastic climates. There's always great food. There's always great history. Because if you look from a socioeconomic, the wine industry has been a luxury brand for thousands of years in a time where there was only a few. So they tend to follow all the same paths that you'd be interested to travel to anyway. So to me, it's all about learning, and to learn about wine, you have to go to its origins. You have to go out to the field, and whenever you can't, you want to bring it to people. So I've done seminars and shows on different regions of the world and whetted people's appetites, and I've also hosted private clients to the major wine regions of France, because that helps justify all the time I want to spend there.
Oh, definitely. Do you have any tours planned for the summer or fall of 2012 that people can get up with you to find out more about?
Yeah, no, I can refer people, and I'm happy to do that do this more as a full-time business and have a more robust schedule.
Okay.
French Explorers is one here based in D.C., do a fantastic job, and there's others. And I'll be happy if somebody sends me an email. I'll be happy to refer them, those that I think are great. I do them typically by referral, and people I've already done them for, and my next one's scheduled for spring of 2013 to Bordeaux.
Oh, whoa. Are you going to be there with, is that in the time of Vin Expo?
No, I typically make sure that I'm not that time. I tend to go. I follow when all the big wine buyers get the private chateau tours.
Okay.
So right before, Robert Parker's group descends and does all their tasting and writes all their notes.
Yeah.
In between that and on Premier is a great time, and because if you have good contacts there, all the great chateaus have their best form in motion. So it's just a great time to be there, and we kind of piggyback on the big dogs.
Oh, you're so smart. Greg Poirier, we thank you so very much for joining us today on Wine and Dine. It's really been a pleasure, and this is a conversation that we will probably continue in the future.
I'd look forward to that. Thank you so much, Lynn.
We will have links up for you to learn more. You're listening to Wine and Dine.